Welcome to the first episode of the Commuters in 2021, and also the first episode of the Commuters in a very long time because we are back. The boys are back.
That's right.
Are we?
Well, maybe. So, for those of you just joining us, The Commuters is a movie discussion podcast between myself, Basil, and this week is going to be Basil, Sky, and Will. Although, if you've watched any of our previous stuff, this is a different Will.
What should they call me?
That's a good question. We would call you probably Bub, but
Bub.
you go by many names. Chef Batman, I believe, is one of your aliases, maybe. Although I've never seen you and him in the same room at the same time, so I can't confirm nor deny that.
Right.
I think we'll just stick with. I mean, Schmitty, we could go with whatever you think.
Yeah, I think that works because like you guys get like regular names, and then for me to just be like Bub.
Well, Sky and Basil are hardly regular names.
This is true, but it's just kind of.
How dare you? How dare you? My name is much more normal than yours. Don't lump us together.
I'm lumping you right in with me.
I don't really know how I feel about the fact that you just lumped me in like that.
Well,
but...
you've been lumped, so take that however you want.
I got lumped. What am I gonna do with myself now?
All right, so I guess we'll just. What do you want to go with then? Do you just want? I'm cool with calling you Will. They'll recognize that you have a different voice. All 27 of our listeners will be there.
Yeah, I guess so. But then when other Wills around, you can call me Schmitty.
Yeah, if or and when that happens. All right, so this week, to kind of kick off the year, I decided that we would kind of kick it off with a very unusual pick. And the reason I'm going with this movie was because a few months ago, I don't know when this was. Maybe it was a couple weeks ago, but Disney announced a huge slate of Disney Plus shows and movies. Just a ridiculous amount of stuff. Tons of Marvel, tons of Star Wars. And amidst all of that, I saw a little logo for a TV show sequel series, whatever you want to call it, that is a sequel to the 1988 Lucasfilm movie Willow. And I thought to myself, why in the world would Disney ever return to that property? For those of you who don't know, Willow is a 1998 American dark fantasy adventure drama. It was directed by Ron Howard, it was produced by George Lucas, and written by Bob Dolman. The story, however, was done by Lucas, and then Bob Dolman just wrote the screenplay based on the story. It stars Warwick Davis, Val Kilmer, Joanne Whaley, Jean Marsh, and Billy Barty. Warwick Davis plays Willow, a reluctant farmer who plays a critical role in protecting a baby from a tyrannical queen who vows to destroy her and take over the world. It's a pretty typical fantasy story, like not very original, and there's not a whole lot in it, in my opinion, that sets it apart, and we'll get into all that. But I kind of want to hear what you guys thought when I just brought up this movie in the first place. Before we even get into the movie, did you guys even know what I was talking about when I suggested it?
I walked downstairs. I'm like, Willow, what is this? So I asked my dad, because again, my dad knows like that kind of era of movies way better than I do. And I'm like, hey, do you know what Willow is? And he's like, oh yeah, I know what Willow is. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, it's got Warwick Davis, and he's like, it's like a fantasy adventure. George Lucas had a part in it. I'm like, oh wow, why have I not heard this? And he's like, I think you know why.
Oh.
Yeah, I had no idea what this was until you mentioned it, and I had to look into it to figure out what the hell am I watching?
How about you, Will?
I had never heard of it, and I looked up. I didn't watch a trailer or anything. I just looked it up on my phone, and all I saw was that it had 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I was just like, okay, so it's probably got a few interesting things about it, but it's kind of meh.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
That's what I expected going in.
It's funny because I'm completely on the opposite spectrum. I was like, uh-oh, it's got a 50 on Rotten Tomatoes. What has Basil gotten us into today?
So my backstory with this movie was when I was I don't know, maybe 12. My brother-in-law, who's significantly older than me, he was sort of like an uncle to me and a couple of my brothers. He showed us this movie because he's a big fan of this movie, or he grew up with it. He's a huge fan of 80s era movies. That's when he was growing up and stuff. So he doesn't care about modern movies, and he's kind of stuck in that area. So he showed us it, and I just remember I was too young to really know what makes a good movie or not, but I remember not liking this movie as a 12-year-old because it was so weird and off-putting. to me then, like, I had seen The Lord of the Rings before I saw this, and it's kind of unfair, and I'll get into that kind of that comparison that you can make. It's kind of unfair to compare those movies because this came out, what, 1988, almost, what, 15 years, 10 years, what, something like that before Lord of the Rings. Obviously, technology hadn't gotten that far. Obviously, fantasy hadn't really broken into the mainstream. People didn't take it very seriously. So it's a little unfair to compare them.
Yeah.
But as a kid, I'm not thinking like that. I'm thinking like this just feels like budget Lord of the Rings. So I had a pretty negative, and I remembered this when they mentioned that series. I was like, that would be a fun movie to talk about because there's a lot in it, and I don't think it's all bad. Like, I think there's stuff in here, and we'll get into that, but I think there's stuff that works. But it's such a weird movie, and the tone is all over the place. I think it's good to establish our history with the IP, so to speak. I do want to mention one thing. This movie, it actually turned a pretty decent profit. It cost $35 million to make, and it made $137 million. So it wasn't a box office failure or anything, but also, it wasn't Star Wars. It wasn't made off of $11 million and then went to gross $700 million. So it wasn't like a huge hit, but it definitely wasn't a failure by any stretch of the imagination. Once again, I just don't see who was asking for this to come back.
Yeah, I had no idea it's coming back.
You're not wrong there.
Man.
I didn't see that it was coming back till I was like, what is this movie? And then I saw that thing and I'm like, oh, this is why Basil wants us to watch it. This is why he was interested. I'm like, uh-oh. Should I be concerned or should I be excited? That's the real question.
One other backstory thing in the movie. Lucas came up with the idea in like 1972, and they wanted to make it way earlier, but the technology wasn't there at the time. So Lucas kept pushing it back and back and back until, I guess, in the late 80s, he felt the technology was there. And I think some of the effects in the movie hold up, and that's another thing we can talk about later. Just a little bit more backstory so you know where this movie kind of originated and came from. I think right out the gate, do you guys just want to kind of talk about your impressions of maybe we'll stick with the story for now. We'll start with that, because I think the plot is that's where you kind of hit this area of like, okay, this is generic, but also there's some parts that aren't generic, but also it follows a very similar template we've seen Lucasfilm specifically use. Sky, if you want to kick us off with that.
Yeah, sure. So right from the get-go, the moment we like drop into the film, I got a weird kind of like... Do you ever like open up a film that has Lucas attached to it and it has this very particular vibe going in, like the moment you open the film up? If you get what I mean, it's kind of like, it's so weird. It's such a weird thing for me to trying to describe, but like when I open up a film, like I know this isn't like a completely fair comparison considering the director is completely different and all that, and the only thing that really is shared is the fact that Lucas produced and wrote the original story. But something about the opening, I got like vague, like, yeah, I kind of feel a little bit of that Star Wars-y, Indiana Jones kind of vibe, weirdly enough, to like the atmosphere.
Yeah.
I almost wonder if that was intentional on the director's part to try and mimic that.
I think it was.
Okay. Considering some of the dissolves we get later, I was like, that's a stop. Don't do that. I know what you're doing, but don't do it. You're not making me happy here. I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to play with my emotions and make me think that I'm experiencing something that means a lot to me. Instead, I'm experiencing a very... I hate to say generic, but it like you said earlier, it's a very generic fantasy story about Willow, our main character, taking this baby across the land to try and stop this evil queen. And I'm like, okay. You mentioned tonal, like the kind of tonal vibe of the movie being a little weird. I can't ever figure out if it's trying to be like, this is some serious stuff and we need to take it seriously, or this is a comedy. Because it tries to be a comedy. Like,
yeah,
nearly every other line of dialogue kind of feels like that, to be honest. Even the most serious of situations is peppered with just bizarre inclusions of humor. There's these characters, the Brownies, I believe is what they are, right? Is that
the little guys?
Oh gosh, you're bringing them up right from the...
I have to, because every time they're in a scene, I get frustrated. Because they're like the one part of the movie that I don't feel ever works for me. And everything related to them is a gag. Everything. Oh.
Yeah, they're comedic relief, right? I mean, it's funny because there's a very simple comparison to be made with this movie, and I think it's the first Star Wars movie. Like, I honestly, this is pretty much fantasy version of the first Star Wars movie, which is weird because that's sort of fantasy. So let's like hit off from the get-go. Think about it like this. The baby is the Death Star plans. The evil queen is Darth Vader, the Emperor, whatever you want to call them. Those annoying freaking brownies are R2D2 and C3PO. Obviously, the main character, Warwick Davis, Willow, he's a farmer. He's Luke Skywalker, but instead of a kid, he's the parent. And Val Kilmer plays a Han Solo knockoff.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
he gets with a princess. It's literally Star Wars, but a fantasy setting.
Yeah.
I mean, the main character even has to learn how to use a special power that he had in him all along.
It causes me a lot of pain to think about it. Like,
And he even has a part at the end where he has to use it to save the day after a wise, like, old mentor person, like, the voice is in his head telling him to use it.
use the magic, Willow. Use the magic.
Like, it's Star Wars.
You're just making me, like, I'm getting, like, bad, just, like, weird reverberations of, like, oh god, what have I experienced? I just realized I watched fantasy Star Wars.
What did you think, kind of, Will, about, like, the overall plot and kind of the progression of the story and stuff?
Yeah, it's like you guys have been saying. It's really generic, and like Val Kilmer, the whole movie, I was just like, yeah, he's definitely not supposed to be Han Solo. Like he even kind of looks like Harrison Ford a little bit.
He has he's a criminal, you know, and then oh my gosh, it's
Yeah, and I could tell they were trying to set up like certain things, like the two little guys. They were trying to make them like really popular, like comedic relief characters.
I struggled to understand that.
I didn't hate all their scenes, but like I could tell sometimes it was just really forced, and their voices were pretty ridiculous. It's pretty out of place, actually.
Yeah, you know The Room? I want to make a comparison real quick to why they're.
oh man, you're going right to the.
So you know The Room? You know how like sometimes the dialogue is just so obtuse and it sounds like they just were like, how about you just dub over with whatever? That's what I felt like nearly every time the brownies open their mouth. They're just like, just say things. I recall that during there's that one particular chase like kind of early in the movie where they reintroduce Val Kilmer's character after the initial time.
His name is Mad Mortigan, by the way.
Matt, I'm gonna call. Wait, isn't it Mad?
No spaces. Mad Mardigan, no spaces.
I'm just gonna call him Mr. Mad. Mr. Mad is reintroduced, and there's like this chase on the wagon. I have no idea what the brownies are doing through that whole scene, except it looks like they're falling around and they're having a hard time trying to stay on the wagon. And they say things, and I'm like, I vaguely hear, help me or something. I'm like, what is happening? Not to mention the fact that I get this weird, like, every time I saw them on screen, because of the technology wasn't quite where it was yet now, I got, like, this weird, like, uncanny valley vibe from it, and it made me really uncomfortable.
Well, so they used green screen, obviously, to, like, shrink them.
Yeah.
Is it really a like technological capability error, or I kind of feel like they just messed up the green screen?
Well, so that's the thing. I think there's maybe 2 shots I counted where I was like, oh yeah, they kind of look like they fit right there. Like they kind of don't look a YouTube video green screen YouTuber who's learning how to do it for the first time.
They don't look like a YouTube poop.
There's multiple parts where, you know how like there's the classic, and it's used as a joke now in modern, a lot of YouTube videos use it where it's like somebody running against a green screen, but they're just running in place. And then they'll animate them as like a joke and it looks awful, but it's a joke. I think we've used that before. It's funny because it looks so bad. Well, in this, and I know these are comic relief characters, but to make them like climb over stuff or move, a lot of the time they just pantomimed it. So it's like they're running in place. And it's so obvious. Every single time it happened, I was just laughing because of how bad it looked. And I seriously think if you cut out every single shot the brownies are in, the movie would be like 40% better. I know that they serve a plot function. They're the guides. They are supposed to help Willow get to where he needs to go, but they hardly even direct him anywhere. They're kind of just like, oh, we don't know where we're going, in their ridiculous French accents. Um, it's, we could go for hours probably about the brownies and how just weird and upsetting. I don't know. To me, they're like upsetting as just a premise. It's like the Minions nowadays, but I guess good on them for being the first version of the Minions. It's so bothersome to me. Like, they have these ridiculous, annoying voices, and every single thing they say it's not real dialogue. It's just like ridiculous jokes and or like punchlines or just like yelling something to yell something.
Well, some of them aren't even that. Like,
Yeah.
there's this one, I remember they used this like at least like 3 times where they're like, which way? That way. No, that way. And like, I could tell they were trying to like, they really wanted people to quote that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's
It's not even funny. It's just like, there's nothing to it. It's just that way. Yeah, okay, that way.
It's kind of weird to me considering the fact that like Basil, you said you're like, oh, their entire concept like offends me, basically, or not offends, but like it bothers you. I could have seen it working if they didn't make them comic relief and they treated them more like this kind of like what you expect things like Fae folk and stuff like that in most actual fantasy settings, but instead they're like, ha, we all know.
yeah. Well, that's also there's like a comedic side to it where it's like, okay, so, this Warwick Davis and like his people in this movie and this is something I give them props for. They actually like cast all these, I guess little people would be the right term, right? Whatever. I don't want to get canceled too soon. They cast them like genuinely these people who they didn't shrink them or anything with like technology.
Oh, really?
And I was like, oh, that's cool. And then immediately after they shrink all of those people, like, and I guess it's supposed to be kind of a joke that the brownies are like tiny people, even smaller than regular small people, if that makes sense. I know this is kind of like walking on eggshells a little bit, but Warwick Davis, there's the part where they meet him or whatever, and he's just kind of like brushes one away or whatever, like, because they're so small compared to him. And I think maybe they were going for some kind of physical humor with that. Obviously, the whole concept of the brownies is physical humor. And I don't want to say dialogue humor, but they attempted it. It's slapstick, And so it's like, oh, look at these are real adult, 6-foot men, and then they shrink them down, and then they put them next to Warwick Davis, who's like 3 foot tall. That's supposed to be funny. Maybe.
Yeah, they're little, they have funny voices. That's the idea.
But
I hate them. That's the moral of my story.
Well, yeah, that's because it ends there. Like that sentence I just said, they're little and they have funny that's where their entire characters end.
that's it. All right. And well, okay. So, and I think maybe it's time to get back onto the main plot. I do want to say, I think it starts off pretty strong. Yes, it's Star Wars. Like, it starts off showing the bad guy, and then like the bad guy's evil plan. It is Star Wars, but it starts off with good presentation. It's very serious. And then even up into like, and we'll get into some of the acting because obviously like the child actors aren't going to be good. I think Warwick Davis does a good job. I think he does a good job. He puts on a good performance. I'll tell you who doesn't do a good job. And when the movie falls apart for me, like immediately, like it takes a nosedive. It's when Mad Morgan leaves the cage, and I realize that, oh no, this character's in the movie for the rest of the movie. I thought, and I couldn't remember a lot from when I'd last seen it, but I thought he was just like a joke character. Like it's kind of funny. This dude's just dying on the side of the road and he keeps asking them to let him go. I thought they were just going to leave it at that. And then it was dawning on me. I'm like, wait, no, I think that's Val Kilmer. And then this slow realization. And then when he gets out of the cave and he does like a backflip or something, and I'm like, that's when the whole thing just comes tumbling down and the whole tone of the movie goes out the window that they had set up leading up to that point. Because up to that point, the movie had like a little bit like lighthearted moments, but it was still pretty serious and was taking itself kind of seriously. And then as soon as that dude shows up, it just goes out the window. The tone is completely like crazy and ridiculous and super like cheesy, and not an endearing way. Cheesy in just this makes me uncomfortable way. And Val Kilmer was atrociously miscast as that character, I think, because he doesn't really have that sense of charisma that you'd want out of that type of character. Like Han Solo, the reason he's so memorable is because Harrison Ford has, like, especially young Harrison Ford, he has a palpable sense of charisma that, I'm sorry, Val Kilmer does not have that. Like, he just doesn't have that about him. At least not for me. And then combine him with this ridiculous dialogue and how physically, it's like, you know how when Johnny Depp goes into Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one, and he brings this kind of wacky weirdness to the role and it works? It's like somebody tried to do that and it just completely did not work in any way, shape, or form, at least for me.
The thing that bugged me, okay, the thing that bugged me for him was that they reintroduced him like 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
That really bothered me because there's like, oh, he's in the cage. Now he's off. And then, oh, now Will has the baby back and he's probably dead. He's like, oh, nope, now he's back, but he's in drag. And then he goes off again. And then they keep having this, oh, I'm not going to be your friend. Oh, no, I am. It just goes on. And it's a long movie, too.
Yeah, well, it feels longer than it is. I'll say that much. I think what is it? It's like an hour and a half or something. Hour and 26 minutes.
No, it's 2 hours.
Oh man, yeah, 126 minutes. Damn, you're right. Never mind. It felt just as long as it was.
Yeah.
You were about to say about Mad Mardigan, Sky?
I honestly, you both have summed up pretty much every issue I had. Is I hate his dialogue almost constantly. I get the vibe they were trying to make him this like scoundrel that you appreciate or you like over the course of the story because he grows. Instead, I'm just like, the first time they introduce him, I'm like, oh my. Before, you know how you said, Basil, you're like, this is where it goes downhill. The moment he got introduced and I saw him in the cage and they were talking to him, I was like, oh, good God, no. This is horrible. This is going to be awful. I hate him already. I don't even like him and he's in the cage still. I could tell his dialogue is it's like trying to be, what's the word? I guess I would describe it as trying to be funny, clever, and show like, oh, he's such an affable, interesting character who knows? Ooh, what's his deal? And I just don't care. I didn't care at all about his character in the beginning, and then they develop him, and I'm like, I still don't like you because you're just here to be that archetype. I can tell that's what your character is, and Val Kilmer doesn't help it at all. I would also describe him as a weirdly slimy character, if you know what I mean. Like,
exactly,
have you ever watched a character? Yeah, you're just like, ugh, I don't like it, and it doesn't feel right, which is such a weird comparison piece because I like Warwick Davis's character a lot. I like Willow actually through most of the film.
Well, yeah, because
if not all.
Willow's compelling because he's really the only character in the entire movie with a believable arc.
Yeah,
like none of the characters in the movie at all. A lot of them have arcs, but none of them feel earned even a little bit. And we'll get into the love story between the princess and Mad Mardigan. Back to Willow. He's the only one who comes off as like a character in a movie, like a genuine like character, and he wants to help this kid, and he wants to protect. Like everything he does is kind of, except for in the very beginning when he's like, throw that baby back in the river. That was a little dark, but after that, like after he like gets endeared to the baby, he wants to protect it, and he does everything he can to protect it. And then all the way up into the end, he goes up against the evil queen and stuff, who are way more powerful than him, and he just like he has a certain element of like he's the little guy, he's the Frodo, he's the what have you. And obviously this movie is very heavily inspired by the Lord of the Rings books. Like I think it wears that on its sleeve, just the fact that the main character, like let's face it, they're hobbits. That's what they are, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. They're a stand-in for hobbits. Like, also, was it really necessary to name the humans like they had some ridiculous name for the humans? It was like the Atoria or something. And it's like, what Lord of the Rings did so well? They just call the humans the big folk. That, like, from the hobbits' perspective, they'd just be like, oh yeah, the big folk. Like, yeah, that's simple. Don't make up a ridiculous name for, well, let's see. So the little people were called the Nelwyn. I have the Wikipedia page up, by the way. I'm using it for reference. The little people were called the Nelwyn. Let's see. The big people were called the Daikini. Why didn't you just call them the big folk or humans?
Or
like, why was it necessary to come up with a ridiculous name for the humans? Sorry, I got off track. I was talking about character motivation. But yeah, I think Willow himself, Warwick Davis does a good job. which I honestly think, acting-wise, back to a quick thing, Mad Mardigan, I think Val Kilmer, this might be his worst performance I've ever seen. I think he does not do a good job at all. Honestly, I think most of the actors in this movie don't do a good job, with the exception of the Evil Queen does a good job, and Willow does a good job, and that's kind of it.
I like their like wizard man in their village.
Oh,
I like
yeah.
him.
Oh, yeah,
I
he
wish he
was
could have.
pretty
He's great.
Stayed important.
I liked how they played with that element of the story where he's talking about like the bones, and then like really they just do nothing, and then he makes up whatever the heck he wants.
Yeah, that was great.
I really like that.
Did you like how the bones were just like the most bone-looking bones? Like they were like 6 or whatever 5-inch cliche-looking dog bone-looking bones.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a great touch. There's definitely some good stuff in the movie. I don't want to make it sound like it's a complete garbage fire, because it really isn't. Like we were saying before about like the main character, because if you get a good main character, like I'll finish the movie. I might not like it overall, but like when Willow's on screen and when he's like his journey's moving forward, I'm like, oh, okay. I will say they did a good job with the baby actor, like the baby itself,
yeah.
Alora.
Yeah.
They got good reactions for like, or when they wanted to use her for comedic effect. Like that's pretty much all you can do with the baby. But I've seen it done really weirdly, and I think they did a pretty solid job there. I think all of the children actors and most of the extras were all pretty bad, like just that acting in general.
His daughter, I think, was all right, but his son was horrible.
Yeah, it was rough. Like I know it's kids and all, but I don't know. Even on like the basis of child acting, I think that was bad.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest. I felt like the acting in general is pretty poor. Yeah, with the exception of like a few standouts. I will say though that I still would have preferred we stayed with like that first. I won't lie. I like the first fourth in the movie the most because we stuck with characters I felt actually played characters. And they even to the point where like I appreciated what they were doing. You mentioned earlier that they that all of them are actually individuals with being short.
There you go.
I don't know how to phrase.
You did it.
I don't want to like. I don't.
I think little people is okay to say, Sky. I think little people.
Is it? I just don't want to hurt feelings because I hate hurting feelings. For
I don't think you'll
people
be
that
canceled
are...
for saying little people.
Okay. Well, regardless, I like a lot of them. I actually like. I thought they were way more compelling before we got introduced to anyone else because they kind of feel accurate to what they are. You know, like I appreciate. It's like I'm hanging out with gnomes again or something. It's
a lot
great.
of people get so caught up in the whole, oh, this is the first movie, Black Panther's the first superhero movie ever that has like a mostly black cast. They always focus on like race and stuff, and they always look for that kind of stuff in the modern days, like to be like, oh, this is the first movie, and it's like, I bet you now if they made like a movie with like, you know, starring a little person, they would be like, oh, this is the first movie to have one be, and it's like, because people don't know their movie history, and it's like Willow did this in the 80s, and like they had Warwick Davis as the main character of the whole movie. Like I think that's pretty cool. Cool because it's not something where it's like they're like, oh, we really need to, the movie should only be good or bad based on that premise. It's like, no, this just happens to be the world. This happens to be the way these people are, and they cast accordingly. And I thought they did a good job with that, at least.
Yeah, I do have to say,
Yeah,
I think like when they first showed like the shot of like all of the people in the village, I thought it was some kind of effect. I had no idea they casted like people who are actually that tall. So they always kind of looked a little wrong to me. I can't put my finger on it. They just like it looks like something's wrong.
I don't know if you noticed this, but amongst them, there are children dressed up as adults.
Oh,
I don't know if you guys picked up on
I did
that
not
in
notice
some of the
that.
crowd shots in the village. So I'm pretty sensitive to that because they did the same trick in Lord of the Rings. For some of the wider shots with the hobbits, they'll have like a short person or a kid dressed up as like as a hobbit or an adult, whatever. So I noticed that. That could be partly why it kind of looked a little bit off. Speaking of looks, I do think the movie is shot really well.
Yeah, actually.
This did a lot of those wide, like epic shots in the beautiful scenery before Lord of the Rings did it. Now, yes, all of these wide shots are like static wide shots with people walking. It's not like on a helicopter like in Lord of the Rings where it's like going around the characters and stuff. It's just a static wide shot. But they're very well composed, and they got it. Part of it was shot in New Zealand, which is kind of funny because once again, before Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
there's some stunning landscape shots just overall, actually, even like a lot of the composition in with the dialogue scenes and some of the color work and some of the effects, some of them. We can talk about some of the bad ones too, but there's stuff in this that holds up visually and looks pretty good.
I think it does have a lot to do with the landscapes. Like you said, I did notice that. Like, I was like, some of these sweeping shots are great. I really, really loved the... Actually, the snow terrain was surprisingly interesting because you see that so rarely in fantasy.
Yeah.
Like, snowy terrains. Usually they focus on forests and, like, grasslands and stuff. But you got a little nice mix of it, and I think that actually kept it pretty strong towards feeling like you're on a journey. I actually have nothing against the way the film looks for the most part, besides like you said, there's a few effects that are a little like, but I never found myself being like, ugh, this is so boring to look at. I was more like frustrated by dialogue or characters than I was like the world design itself. I actually like a lot of the costumes and stuff too. I thought the big bad like couple knights that were around the queen were really I like their designs for the most part, except for the princess. I didn't really care for her.
Well,
Weird.
I could not stand. So there's the big evil henchman dude, and he just has a skull on his helmet, and
Oh yeah.
it looked so weak. Like it looked like a Halloween costume, and it stood out because I actually thought for the most part most of the costumes looked pretty good, but that one stood out to me as like at least his helmet, like his his armor was fine, but the skull glued onto the front of his helmet, I don't know, it didn't look even a little bit convincing to me.
Oh, he definitely got that from Party City.
Maybe I liked it because I liked the fact that it felt like he was a hokey like I have to look intimidating.
Yeah, like you definitely get that
Kinda
vibe.
thing.
I don't think the movie like I thought they thought it was scary, whereas like it comes off as like just kind of a goofy 80s villain in that way. Yeah, it's definitely like the production shows the money is there. I thought the designs of a lot of the castles and stuff looked kind of good. Specifically the evil castle, I thought that that looked pretty good for the most part. A lot of that visual stuff isn't, besides some of the effects specifically with the brownies, some of the effects worked pretty good. I thought a lot of the prosthetic stuff and the practical stuff looked pretty good. Even like they did use the stop motion thing for that dragon.
Yeah, that
And-
was rough.
You get mixed kind of results with that. I think there were some parts where I was like, oh yeah, that doesn't look way too bad. And then there's parts where I'm like, oh, okay.
When I saw that, I was kind of like, oh, hey, they did stop motion. I like stop motion quite a bit. So I was kind of like, just happy to see like it be used.
It does give you kind of like, I don't know, it gave me a little bit of like nostalgic vibes towards like the, what is it? The Greek one back in the day that was famous. Is it Jason and the Argonauts or something? I can't remember what it's called, but, or no, it's freaking Clash of the Titans, the original Clash of the Titans, where it's famous for having like a stop motion Cyclops and skeletons and whatnot. I thought that was fun to see from that perspective. And because, we don't really see stop motion anymore used in that way.
Yeah. But you got to like compare it to something like Star Wars, like Empire with the walkers.
Yeah.
That worked so well because they kind of used it really sparingly.
Yeah. And the walkers are machines,
Yeah.
They're just big machines. They're made out of metal. Whereas when you're doing like a living creature, the walkers are supposed to look stiff. Big giant machines made of metal look stiff. But when you're doing it with like a living dragon and it looks a little stiff, it stands out a lot more.
Yeah.
I think it is important to note that like using stop motion on a machine is a much different experience than using it on like a living breathing creature. It's one of the reasons why like I think it works for the skeletons from Jason and the Argonauts, but on the flip side, using it for like what was there's a movie that I know, or was it what am I thinking? Clash of the Titans.
That's what I just said.
Oh yeah, you're right. I'm stupid. I was gonna say the like there's like a Cyclops or something, and it's infinitely weirder.
Yeah, you're just repeating what I just said.
Bone. I am. Dang. All right. Well, you know what I mean, though.
I know.
I
said it.
I know what you mean. I said it. No, I think Will's got a point though. Like I appreciate stop motion when it's used well as well. It's just something was weird. Also, I want to note you're wrong. It's not a dragon. It's called a Ebersisk monster that was originally a troll.
I apologize.
I prefer the term evil blob.
So doubling back to the story, so I mentioned earlier about character motivation, and I think we should talk about the most convincing arc in this whole movie. It's the character arc of the evil princess who turns good. I couldn't tell you how much I was affected by her realistic and complete turn from the evil side to the good side.
Oh, yeah.
I was so bought in to her character at that point, and how they cleverly sprinkled in this like love story, and they built up to it, and they earned it by spending so much time building up to it. And she was still reluctant at the end to go against her mother. Oh wait, no, she wasn't. It happened in 2 seconds with a magic potion.
But, they also, made us think it wouldn't happen by the other henchmen saying, she's going to betray you, So then I thought it wouldn't happen, but then it actually did, and it surprised me.
Oh my gosh.
Can both of you please, man, can you tell me how you really feel?
It was horrible.
They spend 3 movies turning Darth Vader from the good side to the bad side, right? I mean, technically 2, because you only know that he's his father in the second movie, but still. When Luke Skywalker shows up, they spend the entire movie of Return of the Jedi on that, trying to get him to turn good. And he only does it at the very end when his son is being tortured to death. And he dies after doing it. In this, the daughter of the queen, who was super, brainwashed, whatever you want to call it, she was super evil in the beginning. And then she just turns good because there's a cute guy on the other side. And then, her entire ideology flips over. After she becomes good, she's, super for the cause now. And I'm like, you didn't build up to any of this. You didn't give us... There's no reason this should happen. The love potion wasn't even put on her. I would have been okay if the love... I mean, obviously there's connotations to a love potion being put on a woman, more so than a guy. But it just doesn't make any sense. At all. Why is she doing this? Why is she... yeah, okay, maybe she likes the guy, but she still wouldn't... That doesn't change the fact that she still wants to kill the baby or whatever to save her. It's...
I can tell you why they did that 100%. I can tell you why they decided they needed this. It was because,
well, I know,
Basil, they need to fill their quota of some hero and the girl fall in love in some stupid way, and this is how they decided it, rather than just accepting that this is a problem with a lot of I guess I'm gonna point my finger real quick at the 80s to 90s era of movies, but the hero gets the girl thing, except Val Kilmer's character isn't the actual hero.
Yeah, right, he's a scumbag.
Yeah, he's a scumbag. I don't like him. I never liked his character the whole film. I never felt I wanted this, and they gave it anyway. But a whole lot of movies from that era just assume that it's better to have this love story, even if it's poorly done. It's one of the reasons why the weakest portion of the Indiana Jones films for me was always the weird love interest vibe in the background. That's why I like Last Crusade, because it kind of it subverts that and turns the quote unquote I don't know, the main heroine into a...
She talks in her sleep.
Sean Connery, rest in peace. No, I get what you're saying. And yeah, they have to fill that quota. It's a Lucasfilm movie. And what do all the Lucasfilm movies have? A love interest. The first Star Wars has, ooh, will they, won't they? Oh, turns out they're siblings. The second Star Wars, Han and Leia. Third Star Wars, Han and Leia. They have to cover the bases, Indiana Jones in all those movies, except for the third one, which is funny. Well, she technically counts as a love interest in the third one, I would say.
Yeah.
But she's done in probably the best way. And I think the first one, Marion, works really good too. It's so forced, and it doesn't add anything. And the only thing it does is it works to take you out of the movie. And that's not what you want out of a love story type situation.
No.
There's another character I feel like we need to talk about, though, because they end up being a MacGuffin as the film goes on.
Isn't that just all the side characters, though, in this movie?
Yeah, but there's a particular one who is the MacGuffin. It's that one lady who needs to be turned back into a human in order... Raziel, I think?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that character who you're introduced to them, and throughout the whole movie, I'm just kind of I can't wait for this payoff. Because I'm I'm just ready for it to be done. Because I was kind of I don't know about you guys, but I was immediately taken out of the mysticism aspect of it when they introduced her character, and they're oh yeah, she's actually this really great sorceress and all that, but she can't do it because she's an animal. She needs to turn back. And I'm just
They were going for the Yoda thing, right? Like that's what it was.
Oh, yeah.
This goofy small creature, but really she's like a really powerful magic person
Except, you know what? You know what made Yoda work compared to this?
that Luke didn't have to turn him into a old lady.
Well, for one, yes, but two, he's kind of like a weird hermit that like you're told about beforehand. Like everyone in the world, or I'm sorry, not everyone in the world. Luke learns about Yoda, like vaguely, hearing that there's some great Jedi on Dagobah, and he needs to learn from him, and it kind of has this air of like, who is it? Is it really him? It's kind of like you as the viewer are discovering this along with Luke.
Yeah.
This character's just like, yeah, it's me.
But yeah, like Yoda actually does stuff. Like he lifts the X-wing with one hand after Luke can't do it. So like he's shown that he actually has like abilities, and then the old lady wizard just kind of gets snuffed in the final battle.
She's also another small annoying comedic relief character. We already have the two brownies, and then they go ahead and add a third small annoying comedic relief character. Somebody who was making this movie was like, as many small annoying comedic relief characters as we could fit in.
I think I know who.
George Lucas.
Well, consider how much Jar Jar that felt.
Oh my
sometimes.
gosh. Yeah. Uh,
Consider that. I got a lot of like Phantom Menace vibes, weirdly enough. Like the bad parts of Phantom Menace through this.
In this movie's defense, more stuff happens in it than in Phantom Menace.
This is true.
True.
Whether or not that stuff is good, that's up for debate. But I think, at least I will say the movie does keep stuff happening. Some of the stuff is just pointless stuff to be stuff. But it just keeps happening. Stuff keeps happening. Nobody's sitting in a room talking about trade negotiations.
It's not always good. But
I'm
it's
not
happening.
saying which one I would prefer, but
I'm glad you brought that up because I do want to make a comparison again. But this isn't. I wanted to segue because I wanted to talk about the score for a second.
You mean the theme they made and used over and over and over and over again?
No. There's like more than one, but there's like. All right, I want to remind you of the weird music that plays when they first go to that big town village, or I'm sorry, to their big like village celebration that's happening.
Oh,
it's like a weird like techno thing.
Yeah.
And like synth, and I'm like, what is this?
So, by the way,
horrible.
for those who don't know, James Horner did the music for this.
Who?
James Horner. He also did the music for. Let me pull it up.
I don't remember anything.
He did the music for Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. He did the score for Titanic, and he did Avatar. So he usually works with James Cameron.
What happened?
I don't know.
What happened to all of his creativity?
Well,
his smile, his creativity. God.
The main theme, I guess you could call it Willow's theme or the hero theme in this. I think it's good. Like it's heroic. It's good. The problem is none of the other side music works, and they overuse the main theme. So every single time in this movie when something heroic is happening, which is like 70% of the movie, they blast this theme with very little variation on it. And it's just over and over and over and over again. I was just like, come on. Like, you could do better, James Horner.
Now that you've told me that that's the same guy who did the Titanic soundtrack, I am immediately disgusted. I'm like, this is it? Dude, I know you've got so much good in
also, for the record, we should be a little bit respectful because he did die 5 years ago.
Wait, he did?
Yeah, at 61.
Dude.
Oh, that's too young.
Sucks.
Yeah, that's pretty young, man.
I didn't know he's the one that did all that. I don't really look into music scoring too much. I should probably, because like scores are just as important sometimes.
Well, yeah. I mean, what would Lord of the Rings be without its score? What would Star Wars be without its score? Or Indiana Jones?
Exactly. That's really interesting to hear that he's the one that did it. Considering like you said, the one theme is good. It's just there's a lot of like side music that like I was like either I don't remember it or it's that one particular song that I'm like, this is bizarre. It doesn't fit.
I wonder why they didn't get John Williams to do the theme. I mean, this is a Lucasfilm production, and John Williams did like every other Lucasfilm production before this one. Maybe he was busy or something. But I wonder why they didn't get him to do the music.
Honestly, I mean, I don't think his score would have changed my opinion of the film.
Yeah,
all that
but I
much,
mean,
though.
it's like the prequels. You
So-
look at the prequels, and it's like those movies aren't amazing, but the score is like so good. You could almost watch them just for that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I do think if this movie had a Star Wars level score, I think that really would have upped, the watchability. Also, he died, by the way, in a plane crash he was piloting. I don't know what it is about people that work with Lucas and then the need to fly planes and crash them. Harrison Ford. Yeah, that does stink for that. 61's too young to go.
Yeah.
But hey, at least he didn't have to see 2020.
Hey, on the plus side, he wasn't gonna have to score the second Avatar film that will never exist. Sorry, that's really harsh. Actually, I'm sure it'll come out in 5 years.
Let's get back onto the main discussion of the film story. I think we've covered quite a lot. Let's talk about the culmination of this movie, the final act. So I'm a little bit of prerequisite, building up to it. At this point in the film, the princess has turned good. The army, they have gotten an army, and Mad Mortigan has accepted his role as oh, by the way, he's the best swordsman in the world. We know this because he told us it. We didn't really see any proof of that in the entire movie, but he is the best swordsman in the world.
It took him an hour to get his hands on the sword.
I know. Oh my gosh. That's funny you say that, Will, because I literally paused the movie and looked at the timestamp, and it was like something like an hour and 10 minutes into the movie before he touched the sword. Like, I made a note of that because I thought I couldn't believe that they literally did that. It's funny because I kept comparing him to to Aragorn in my head, and I'm like, man, could you imagine if Aragorn showed up at the beginning of Lord of the Rings, was like, hey guys, I'm the best swordsman in the whole movie, and then doesn't touch a sword until an hour and 10 minutes into it. We know Aragorn's a good swordsman because he shows it throughout the entire trilogy, but he never once says it, and nobody around him says it.
Right, he doesn't have to.
It's basic storytelling. I can't stand it when a character tells the audience who they are. Back to the ending of the film. So they all go to the castle, and then they're going to work together, and they're going to stop him, but Willow still isn't sure about his abilities with the magic and such. So, but they need the magic to fight the evil queen. So she comes out, and then she turns them all to pigs, so they have a lot of bacon. That scene, I want to mention that scene specifically, because when I was a kid, when I saw this, that freaked me out. I think the transformation effects there with like all the prosthetic stuff, I think that actually holds up pretty well. Like, it's really creepy and unsettling the way they do like the teeth and stuff and like the faces. There's a couple shots in there that I'm like, oh, that looks like a cheap werewolf costume. Like the initial like transformation effects, I'm like, oh, those are pretty good. It's unsettling. What do you guys think about that?
Like the prosthetic work?
Just that whole
Or
kind of
just-
scene, because I think it's kind of like a big scene in the movie, and I just wanted to bring it up because, yeah, it really bothered me as a kid.
I think the prosthetic work is good. I have to agree. I think it looks pretty solid for what I was expecting, considering my expectations were very low by this point. But I was like, huh, not bad movie, good job. I was like, but why pigs?
Because
Why is this?
why not?
Don't say yeah. Why not? I don't know. I was just like, but why pigs?
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you, Sky. I don't have that much to say.
Yeah.
What the? Which part? The
Well,
why
everything,
pigs?
just like, yeah, okay. The movie had kind of lost me by that point.
That's a good point. All right, so getting that aside, I was just curious what you guys thought about that. So then what happens? So they get the baby, and then Willow, he uses he like has his moment where he does the magic and gets everyone back to normal, which ultimately shows that was just kind of pointless, that scene,
Yeah.
because they literally undo it in 2 seconds. Then they just they attack the castle, which suddenly has way less soldiers and stuff, I guess, now. Like, it's pretty easy to attack. And Willow goes to the chamber where the evil queen's trying to do the evil ritual and whatnot, which I will say, like, the way they shoot that, it's really creepy. And I don't know, I think there's certain scenes that, like, work in terms of, like, just hitting that, oh, this is kind of unsettling. Like, the whole dynamic of it being a baby and stuff, and she wants, the blood and whatnot. Like, that's pretty hardcore for a PG movie. So then there's a battle between her and the old lady, and then Willow, at the end of the day, saves her or sorry, Willow wins. I can't really remember exactly what happened here because, like you said, the movie was losing me a little bit. But doesn't he like he tricks her or something?
Oh, he uses his old magic trick.
Yeah, which I thought that was a good moment actually.
I liked the moment where he threw like the egg that turns things into stone at her, and it like didn't work.
It's an acorn.
Really? I thought it was an egg the whole time.
Oh, what? They're acorns. He threw one at the. Remember, he was gonna throw one at the troll earlier, but it ended up hitting the bridge on the board.
Yeah.
But the trolls look like Wookiees.
And he was also gonna throw one at Mr. Mad because he's like, don't you mess with me. If I throw this acorn at you, it'll turn you to stone.
Yeah.
And I really wanted him to because it would have made.
Oh my gosh! Right? Like, could you imagine? The whole movie would have been a million times better.
But I like the moment where like it kind of showed how powerful the villain is. That even that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then he has to.
I also liked it. Or go ahead.
He has to rely on like being himself to save the day.
Yeah, well said. That's pretty much what I was gonna say. Like I like it when it's not about, the magic powers or their prowess as a warrior. Like, to me, I think it's endearing when a character at the end of the day, it's because of who they are that they win.
Yeah.
And that's something that when done right, I should say. And I think that is one thing like at the end that works for me. That's why I said that he has an arc. Willow has an arc. Mad Morgan, I guess his arc is he goes from being it's Han Solo's arc, but done worse.
Yeah, but it doesn't.
And then the princess's arc is even worse. But they have arcs from a perspective of yes, there are arcs. The only one that's done well though is Willow's.
I mean, I also think it ties right back into what he's told at the beginning of the film. Remember, he's like, so why did you pick that finger? He's like, oh, well, actually, I wanted to pick my own. And he's like, see, you need faith in yourself.
Yeah.
And it's like, in the end, it worked.
Yeah.
And honestly, I never felt like it was like, that's one of the, like you said, it's probably the one arc I was like, I don't feel like I got, like, fed this. I feel like you made a point that he has to grow, and he ended up doing it in a totally unexpected way, to be honest. Like, I wouldn't have thought using that.
I do feel they could have done a little better with his character overall. Like, he kind of annoyed me a lot when he's like, hey, stop it. Half the movie.
I mean, he's Luke Skywalker in the first Star Wars movie, right? Like, Luke Skywalker in the first Star Wars movie complains about everything.
Yeah, but he wasn't nearly as useless.
Yeah, but that is a good point. There's a lot of just whining in this movie, like, of characters whining at each other about things, whether it's Mad Morgan or Willow or the princess, like, whatever, or the Brown. Like, everybody's just kind of whining at each other.
Yeah.
And it's very annoying. Like, and it's kind of just throughout the entire movie. Or, like, that because there's so many jokes at other characters' expense. Like, it's a weird way to say it, like mean jokes, and I have no issue with mean jokes. Like, I like Rick and Morty, but it's like the way they're done in this movie, it's so much of the humor is just, look how dumb you are.
Yeah.
Like, to one character saying that to another. You guys, like, I just feel like the writers were like, we had no idea how to do comedy. We need to throw some joke in here. Oh, let's make fun of how this person thinks this person's short, or how this person thinks this person's dumb, or how this person thinks this person's ugly. Like, that's all they could come up with. So, I don't know. I mean, there's so many. It's why, like, I mean, it's kind of why this movie just kind of faded into history, and why I was so shocked when Disney's like, yeah, let's bring this back.
I mean, the thing that sucks about that is that I also don't even really get why, if this was well received, like, by all accounts, it's not. I don't like pointing at like a concept and being like, this is unoriginal, and honestly you're grasping at the lowest common denominator with this, but I can't think of a single aspect of this film that's quote unquote original. If you know what I mean.
So you compare this. The reason Star Wars works. Star Wars is a bunch of different things that we've all like that at that point even they've seen it before. They've seen the Hidden Fortress. They've seen all of these movies that have similar concepts, westerns, what have you. But Star Wars gave it a fresh new look and an exciting like kind of feel. Indiana Jones, that is a straight genre ripoff of the 1930s adventure serials. but it did it in a way that was really like exciting and entertaining, and it had a lead who had charisma, and it was focused. It was hyper focused on what it wanted to be. Willow's just kind of like, it's generic fantasy. Like there's nothing special really about it. There's no like, you don't have Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. You don't have this crazy interesting universe that was Star Wars before Disney got a hand on. Willow, it's just so bland. And when you see stuff like Lord of the Rings that have this kind of appeal to them, or like a lot of people like Game of Thrones because it has its own spin on it. I don't know, you just see this. I was thinking about, and this is a recent, maybe a weird pick to compare this to, but I was thinking about that Pixar movie that came out last year. There was a
Outward?
Onward.
Yeah, Onward.
Onward. That's it. Sorry, I was confusing it with a different fantasy thing.
It's just generic fantasy, but whatever. They're like, oh, our twist in that movie was it's modern generic fantasy, but it's still generic. Like when you don't have anything really going for your movie other than the fact that it has a fantasy flavor, that's not a great way to push a movie. And I think this could have worked well if you had the right casting and writing. It could have elevated it. But at the end of the day, it was always just going to be a generic world. There's nothing really interesting or unique about this fantasy world. It's just, oh, look at, there's magic and there's armies and castles and dragons and whatever. There's Wookiees. Sorry, I mean trolls. There's nothing way to... it doesn't have that it factor, you know?
Absolutely. I think that's the thing, is like this is such a weird situation where I'm like, why is this coming back? I mean, if you told me that there was some like, if you told me this was like a cult classic or something, and like I saw like those aspects in it, that I'm like, this looks like something special. There's some heart here that you don't see otherwise. Except I don't see it. I don't see like that inner kind of like gem that just needs to be polished, and you could make something incredible. It's like, yeah, I see a fantasy movie that I feel like I could have seen a couple times by now.
Can I make one more comparison?
Go ahead.
1 year before this movie came out, guess what movie came out? A year before Willow, The Princess Bride.
Oh.
And I think this is the perfect comparison. Because The Princess Bride, yeah, it's got its old stuff in terms of like effects and stuff, but I think that movie holds up. And I think it has heart, and I think the acting and the characters, there's a reason it's a classic. There's a reason people remember it so fondly. There's a reason it's stuck around in pop culture for so long. Like, it has heart. It has something to separate it from the other generic fantasy movies. This movie just doesn't have that. And I think that's kind of like the long and the short of it. What do you guys... Will, what do you think about that?
Compare the little guy, the brownies, like compare their little bit of going like that way, no, that way, oh ho ho, like compare that bit to my name is Inigo Montoya, you killed my father, prepare to die. Like that one is just like iconic instantly.
Yeah, I mean,
but then Willow is just like they forced it.
Is there any part in Willow that you would quote, you know, right? Like, not because it's supposed to be a quotable movie or anything, but The Princess Bride is an extremely quotable movie.
Yeah.
I got one line that I might quote. Got one. The bones have spoken.
The bones tell me nothing.
That's about it. That's about it. I frankly, like I said, after that, like, first fourth of the movie, I like started to like totally like clonk. I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to hang up the phone now.
All right, so do we want to hit our final thoughts and recommendation on it?
Sure.
Who wants to go first?
I can go first. I would say I'm actually not sure if I'm glad I watched it or not. I think it was interesting to like think about the stuff it did, but like I can't say the story or the characters are really worth anything at all to me.
Yeah.
But like the effects and like the world, it's not that bad. So I wouldn't say it's a bad movie, but it's definitely not a good movie either. So I actually think Rotten Tomatoes hit it right on the nail with that 50%, like straight in the middle for me.
Yeah. How about you, Sky?
At the end of the day, this is a film that I feel bad. I really don't like trashing films when I think like you could completely avoid it. I hate saying that because I think there's a lot of films that I would discredit, but there's like little things I like that I'll go back to. I don't think I'm ever gonna want to watch Willow again. I don't think I'm ever gonna want to watch this again, and I feel bad because there's, like you said, there's things in here. I like the main performance. I actually appreciate some of the ideas, and I get the vibe they were going for. The problem is that at the end of the day, it's super forgetful for me. Like I'm not gonna remember this film later down the line. I'm not gonna be like, man, do you remember Willow? I remember when the bone spoke. I'm not gonna.
What an iconic moment.
I'm not gonna come back to it. So I honestly I can't say I would recommend it because it's just kind of like I won't lie, I was in slight pain watching the film after a certain point too. So I'm gonna have to say no. Please don't watch it.
All right. Well said. So I think kind of the most impactful thing I got in my head that I can say about this film. I considered watching the Disney Plus series, checking it out when it releases, until I rewatched this movie.
Oh.
It took any interest I had on that series and was like, oh wait, no, this isn't something I'd care about watching.
Dang.
And usually these movies, sequels, whatever Disney makes, like the Star Wars ones and what have you, the Marvel ones, it's usually because the stuff before them is good that people check out the new ones. Or that they have some kind of endearing quality to them. You know, there's nostalgia there. I saw this when I was young. It didn't grab me then. And upon rewatch, I liked it less. I don't think it's a terrible movie, like Will said. I think right down the middle. It's about average. There's a couple aspects of it that are above average, and there's a couple aspects of it that are below average. But if you have like nostalgia for it and you like it, well, then good for you. I'm happy for you. But this movie it didn't do it for me. And I have even less interest than in the Disney Plus show now than I did going in.
Honestly, I'd say that if there's a fantasy series you want to watch from like an older time period that got a reiteration in the future that is good, I'd still recommend The Dark Crystal. Like that's a great example of something that I do think is a cult classic that was great and still is good.
Yeah. No, that's a good point because that got a series and I actually liked that series and I watched it because I liked the movie.
Yeah.
It's just not, it's not there for this one.
Isn't that a weird comparison that I kind of made? But the more I think about it, the more I'm like, that's
pretty spot on.
It's surprisingly like,
The Dark Crystal has an it factor, It's really unlike anything you've ever seen in terms of fantasy, I think. Because it's like all the puppets and stuff. But Willow just doesn't have an it factor. That's our thought on Ron Howard's, Bob Doleman's, George Lucas's Willow. Yeah, so definitely, I thought it was a fun thing to kind of talk about and see, because it's such a weird random movie, and we've done that a couple times now. We did Dune from 1984 and stuff. Yeah, just fun stuff to talk about. Thanks, guys, for coming on and like doing this. I know it's been a long time, and we kind of had to shift schedule around and stuff, but I'm happy that we were able to get at least 3 of us on this, because Spencer and other Will are they're both kind of busy, and Spencer, they're out of commission right now.
Yeah.
So you guys showed up. You answered the call of duty.
Yeah, I'm upset I had to watch that, but otherwise this was great.
And we'll have another, hopefully within a couple of weeks after this video, we'll have another one up too. I really want to get back to doing these more often. We'll figure out what that movie is going to be in the meantime. We'll do that behind the scenes, and then you'll just know when the episode goes live. So thanks anybody who tuned in, checked us out. Remember to always be nice to your willow trees, otherwise somebody might make a movie named after them.
I hate you. I hate you, Will.
What an
Wow.
I screwed that one up. Oh, dang. I meant to say I hate you, Basil. You know what? Let's split the middle. I hate you, Willow. I hate...
All right, then. I guess we're signing off now.
Adios.
Bye.